tomorrow, right? That we have few important concepts in CSS that you should know, right? And then you can later add Tailwind. Hopefully, if we get the time, we'll also learn about how you can use Tailwind to style any sort of a website, right? So once you know HTML, some concepts of CSS, then the same concepts are applied in Tailwind, but in a way better fashion. You don't need to write a lot of coding. For example, I'll just give you an example. For example, in CSS, if you are doing background, if I want to change the background color, right? So what do? Background, I'll say background, I can add color, and I can, okay, somebody said just my screen is not visible. Thanks, Hassan, for reminding. So yeah, if I'm missing out on something, any one of you can unmute themselves and then just say the thing, right? So it's not an awkward thing, right? Just say the thing if I'm missing on something. So hopefully now it's visible, right? So I was saying
Yes.
this thing. Yeah. So background color, if you're writing in CSS, it is just background color. You say you write the property and then you just write the value of it. In Tailwind, it's way easier. It's just BG, and then you can just add BG red, right? So this will most likely turn the color into the red thing. So basically, the amount of lines that you are writing in CSS compared to Tailwind is very less. Sorry, in Tailwind you write very less lines of code, and it's very easier to plug and play in Tailwind compared to the vanilla CSS. So the CSS that we are learning is called vanilla CSS. Basically meaning well framework, which is called Tailwind. When this framework allows you to write CSS in a better fashion, right? Then once this is done, HTML and CSS, right? And obviously you should be knowing that we are not going to cover everything that is required. It's never a thing, right? What you have to do is basically go with HTML, CSS, JS, DOM. You once you complete this cycle, again come back. As you are building more and more projects, you will be getting to know, okay, acha, HTML has this also, CSS has this also. So my goal is not spend on HTML, CSS like tens of hours, right? That's not our goal. We are just going to learn the most essential things, and you should also be knowing that these are just essential things, not all the important things, right? These are the things that are required for you to create a simple website. But as you are building more and more projects, you just need to know, okay, what is, how to implement this, how to implement that, right? The question is, how do you learn that? You need to Google, right? Let's say if I want, if I'm clicking on some link and it should open on some other page, so you should just Google it. And if you have the basic knowledge of it, then you can start implementing the thing. That's how I have learned, and like that's the best way to learn, right? So this is the thing about HTML and CSS. In JS, obviously, as most of you might know, it's JavaScript, right? It's a programming language that is mostly used for web development, but also at various other places, right? So this is the language that is mostly, if you see today, any website that you open on any browser, it is rendered in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There is no fourth language that is being rendered, right? Just to give you an example, if you see this particular website itself, which is xscaleraw.com, or if I go to google.com, right? So this is the google.com, right? Let me open it in the actual fashion. So we are on a website which is google.com. Now, how do I know whether it is written in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? You can go click right click and go to this inspect tab, right? If you click on the inspect tab, here you can see a lot of, as you can see on the top, HTML is written, some head tag is written. Obviously, don't get confused with this, but with the time you will learn what each tag does. But this is the thing. So if you open any tab, right click on it and inspect. If I go to chat GPT, right, again, if I do inspect, right, again, this is being rendered in HTML. So anything that you want to implement, any website you want to implement, you need to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I think this is pretty self-explanatory, right? The reason why they chose HTML, CSS, and JS, nobody knows actually. Maybe the person who has created the web pages or web browsers, more specifically, he thought that this is the better way to structure. Okay, by any website, no matter how big the website is, no matter how big the website is, whether it is ChatGPT, YouTube, or any other web page, it can be written with just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Obviously, like 99.8%, you can say, right? There are some exceptions to it. For some functionalities required some other technology, but most likely, you can cover all these things which is HTML, CSS, and JS. The YouTube, the whole YouTube itself, you can write in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And why do we need frameworks is that you will learn okay, by the more complex website that you're trying to create, the more amount of code has to be written, right? To reduce that amount of lines of code, you are introducing new frameworks where each framework does a specific things that actually just reduces your time. It reduces the complexity in writing the code. It reduces of how you're managing the code. So these frameworks are just cherries on the top that are not really required to be known, but as I said you earlier, that is being used in the industry for a long period of time, right? So coming back to JavaScript, we'll cover basic array operations. As you might know, array is like a data structure uh, thing. Some people also call it as a list, right? What you can do in a list is basically add elements, remove elements, pop elements, right? So this is an in-memory database, a data structure, where you can store the things. Then you have string operations. Basically, how do you, if you take a string, what all you can do, whether it is replacing the string or replacing a string with a substring, or finding whether particular element is there in a string or not. So all these operations will be covered in this thing. Then you have functions. How do you write a function? What is a recursive function? What all are the ways of how you can actually write the functions in JavaScript? Because in JavaScript, you can write in various ways. So at this point, I would also suggest you, if you really want to learn JavaScript, then check out this particular playlist, which is called Namaste JS by this guy called name. Yeah, so Akshay Saini has this particular course on JavaScript where he actually gets into the intricacies of the JavaScript, how it works under the hood. At this point, you don't need to know all these things, as I said you earlier. So once the functions are done, then we'll focus on async await operations. So this is another way of writing functions in JavaScript. Right? So this is another way of writing functions in JavaScript. Then you have promises. Promises are nothing but a fancy way of writing functions where you might want to wait your code for something to come. Might have confused you, but let's say you're writing a code and your website is there. A user comes and enter, okay, bhai, I need something. You're going to ChatGPT and you're asking, how are you, right? So how things happens under the hood is like this prompt actually goes to your database, not database, but wherever ChatGPT server is there, right? ChatGPT server will answer the question, and then you get the response. So until then, you have to wait, right? So that's where you introduce the promises, right? So these are all the basic things of JavaScript that we are going to cover. The last two important things are very important. Async await, very important, and promises are very important. All these things, if you are well aware of any other language, let's say Python, C++, or any other language, these will be covered. But these things are JavaScript specific. It's not like that, you can have in Python as well. You also have asynchronous functions in Python. But why do we need specific? You can go without async functions in Python as well, but you really don't use Python a lot in web development, except if you're using Django as a web framework, right? So this is very JavaScript specific thing, async await and promises. So it's really important to know them. Then once we are done with this JavaScript, we'll go to DOM. DOM actually translates to document object manipulation, right? So we'll get to there. Don't get worried about DOM. It's just how do you play with the tags? How do you play with the attributes of the tags by holding each one of them? That is DOM all about. So once we are done with this, this is like the stage one of our bootcamp. So once this is done, you have covered like a basic thing where you can start learning other things. Once you're done with this, it's all done. Now we'll come to backend part. So this was all front end part. Although JavaScript as a language is used both in front end and backend, right? As a language, I'm saying it is used both in front end and backend. But was more front end thing. Now we'll start with the backend thing. In backend, the first thing that we'll learn is Express. What is an Express? It's just a API server framework. API server framework, right? What it does is basically, let's say your front end request for something, right? Request goes to this Express server, and this Express server will do whatever it wants. Let's say if I'm going on some website, yeah, right, I'm putting my login credentials. Right now, I want to log in. So the front end is what you see, right? If I go to Chat GPT here, right, and if I click on login, if I do, it's taking time. But yeah, you might have seen like a login page, right, where you put the credentials, username and password. Once you put that username and password, when you say login, that particular request is initiated from the front end to the backend, and to the backend itself, it is like Express is the server which is handling all of your requests. Express is the most famous framework that we use for web development. Later you will understand how this also can be mitigated, right? So Express, what it does is it just takes the request from the front end, and there you can write for each particular request what you need to do for each particular request. For example, if I want to log in, what I'll do, the first thing what I do is log in, take the user's credentials, and get the user's credentials from the database, and then I'll match both the credentials. If they are same, I'll say, okay, no, the credential that user has put is correct, right? So allow him to get logged in, right? So I'll redirect him to some other web page, right? In the case if the credentials are not correct, then I'll just say, okay, user is not allowed to log into this particular website. So this is how the general structure of the framework works. Then you have JWT, which translates to JSON Web Tokens. This is meant by when you are logging in. Okay, to understand JWT, understand it this way, right? If you go to YouTube or if you go to Chat GPT, do you put the credentials always, or like you log in once and then you can use it for, I mean, until you logged out, until you log yourself out, you can use it. What happens? Anyone to answer that? Or or let me see you, like if you go to YouTube, like you put your credential once, right? And now let's say if I want to go to my subscription tab, right, where you can see all the subscriptions that I have subscribed to, right? Does it renders only your subscription list, or it renders all the other subscription list? And does it is it the case where if I want to see my subscription list, does YouTube again ask you to put your username and password? What happens? Anyone to answer that? Question is simple. The thing I'm asking is, okay, if once you log into the YouTube, now if I want to go to subscription tab, and if I click on it, does the YouTube gives me back my subscription list, or YouTube asks me, acha, I don't know who you are, just put your credentials again, I'll go to backend, I'll fetch your subscription list, and then I'll show you? Is it the first thing that happens or the second thing? Yes, exactly. So logged in until we log, yeah, it just gives the first one. What is it? Will stay logged out. uh, yep. Will stay logged Yeah, so YouTube doesn't ask the for subscription list, or if I'm liking some video, if I want to check out what are the videos that I have liked, right? If I want to check that particular playlist out, YouTube is not going to ask me, "Bhai, put your credentials again." YouTube just asks for once, and then it does something. It magically stores it somewhere, right? What I have asked Ganta is that if you are going to YouTube, right, youtube.com, right, and you put your credentials, you get into the YouTube. You are logged in as your own credentials. Now, if you have subscribed to few channels, 2 3 channels you have subscribed to, right? Now, if I want to check that subscription list, so if I want to check that subscription list, so if I click on the subscription tab, so all my subscriptions are listed there, right? But what I wanted to seek is कि भाई, how does the YouTube know कि भाई it is my credentials, it is my subscription? How does the YouTube shows? Let me explain it better with the diagram. So what I'm asking is, so this is your youtube.com, and YouTube has, you have subscribed to few people, and let's say this is user one, and whose password is pass1, right? This is user one, and his YouTube looks something like this, where he has subscribed to, if you see his subscriptions tab, it has code basics, it has Harkirat, right? So these are the only 2 channels he has subscribed to, right? And if you go to youtube.com and if you click subscriptions tab, the YouTube is expected to show only these 2 channels. But let's say there is another user and he has some other subscriptions. He has Nikhil Kamath as his subscriber. Nikhil Kamath is the one whom he has subscribed to, right? The question is, this particular user, the user 2, right? The user 2, why doesn't he get the subscriptions of user 1, and why the user 1 doesn't get the subscriptions of user 2? My question is, how does the YouTube get to know that by when the user 2 clicks on subscription tabs, he only gets the subscriptions he has subscribed to and not the subscriptions he didn't subscribe to, right? So how is the YouTube getting to know that this is the user too whose subscriptions are this? Although what I'm trying to say is, okay, when I click on subscriptions tab, YouTube is not asking me, okay, bhai, acha, this is the user too. Just put your password again, sir, right? Who are you? I don't know, right? So there must be a way when you log in for the first time, YouTube must store your credentials somewhere so that it can use that in the subsequent request. So whenever the front end sends a request, backend goes, and these credentials are gone along with it, right? These credentials are gone along with it. The question here is, do you think YouTube stores your user and password both in the browser? What do you guys think? Just put it here in the text. Let me check. What do you guys think? Do you think YouTube stores both your username and password? Okay, somebody just said only username. Okay, but then how do you think backend will be authenticated? I don't think so. Backend will be authenticated using username and password. internet is little gibberish tonight. Right, I'll get it fixed by tomorrow's class, hopefully. But what I was saying is that how does YouTube backend gets to know, okay, by this is the user. You just have put the user one, and you didn't put the user one's password, right? If you didn't put the user one's password, backend will respond back by saying, okay, but you just have given the username. Why didn't you give me user's password? And until you give the user's password back, the YouTube is not going to respond you back with what you are requesting for. If you are requesting for subscription list for user one, if you are requesting, okay, bhai, I have just liked the video, add this in my liked playlist, right? So this everything that you do, it goes back to the backend, and backend then takes the request and stores in the database. So you have front end, you have backend, and backend communicates with the database. Your front end directly never communicates with the database. That's not even allowed, not possible, right? Your front end never actually communicates with the database. So backend is the guy sitting in between. It takes the request, it fetches the data from the database. You can do four types of operations in the database, as you might already know, right? One is create, one another is read, third is update, and fourth is delete. um, I'm trying to get my internet fixed, folks, um, but hopefully I'm audible and my audio quality is good. Can anyone just
Yeah, it
confirm me?
is. Yeah,
Yeah, so I'm trying to get it fixed, hopefully get fixed soon.
sure, that's not an issue.
So let's just continue with our talk. So that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, but you have front end, it communicates with your backend, and then backend gets the data, and the backend gets the data and shows, and again it gets relayed back on the front end. So this is how the whole thing goes on. Uh, but here, as I've said you earlier, sorry again. So yeah, I was saying this thing. Okay, but YouTube, when once you log in, what YouTube does is it doesn't store your username and password. It stores your username. That is true, because username is something which is a public information, right? If I get to know somebody's username, I cannot log in, right? Obviously, I would need to add the password as well, right? So username is something that it stores, but along with username, what it stores is the JWT token that I was talking about. What is JWT token? It is like the first time you log into the web page, the first time you log in into YouTube, whether you log in into ChatGPT or login system, right? The first time you log in, YouTube takes your username, YouTube takes your password, and then it creates a token out of it. What is a token? Token is some gibberish text, like which looks very very different, right? It's something which remains temporary. It's not permanent, right? So that token is, the backend sends back the token again to the front end, and then YouTube stores user along with the token in the web browser. So the user can see the token, and that token is something is used in the successive requests that are hit to YouTube's backend. Hopefully that is clear. All right. So, so let me show it with diagrammatically of what I was saying from that time. Actually, sorry, I'll just get it fixed by tomorrow for sure. So I was saying this thing. Let's say this is your YouTube's front end. This is where you see the fancy web pages of YouTube. You can log in here. You can, once you get logged in, what happens is, here is your YouTube ka backend server. Every web page will have its backend server, right? It goes without saying. So you have backend server of YouTube, which might look like some backend.youtube.com. This doesn't work, but I'm just giving you an example, right? Once you have this backend, then you have your database. You have your database which has all the data of the users. Ke bhai, each user has, let's say, ke bhai, how many subscription he has. It stores what all about the user. It stores about the user name, the actual name of the user, the email of the user, the password of the user. And I'll also tell you that it doesn't store the password in the plain fashion. So let's say if your password is something, right, 1234, so it doesn't store it like that. It actually converts into a hash and store it in that fashion. Then you have password. Then you have the list of all the subscriptions, as I've said you earlier, right? So it stores all these things. So your YouTube sends a request through the YouTube. You sends a request to backend server. The backend server goes to the database and fetches whatever it wants. Let's, if I'm adding someone to my subscription, then what it does is actually go and update my subscription list. So the database, what it does is updates my subscription list. So once this is done, backend will send back the request to the database will send back the request to the backend, and the backend will again send back the request to the YouTube. So this is how it is done, everything. So the first time you log in, you put your username, your password, and the first time backend server will send you something known as um, token, right? It is called JWT token. So this gets stored in your web browser, web page itself. In fact, if I go to ChatGPT, I've already logged in, so my token must be stored somewhere. And let's try to actually find out if we could find our token. If I go to the network tab, click hit again. If I say something, hello. So if you see this conversation tab, so this is the server, the backend server where it is hosted, chatgpt.com/backend API/conversation, right? So if I'm hitting hello or hi, whatever, so my prompt goes to this particular thing, right? I'm sure they might have sent the token along with it. Yes, exactly. This is what I was talking about. So this is my token. Now, if you get this token, you can hit the same backend request and mimic as if you can mimic me, basically what I'm saying. So you got my token, you know what the end request is. So if you give the request to the backend server with along with this particular token that I've just shown you, you can actually the backend will assume that it is Zafir who is speaking to the ChatGPT backend whatever backend server, right? So what actually happened? Then you might say, okay, this is so very dangerous, right? This token, if anyone can get it, they can mimic, and it happens the same thing for every web browser. Even Twitter has the same thing, right? So but this things gets changed every 2-3 hours, or some has the limit of like every 2 days, 3 days. So this keeps changing, right? So even if somebody has it, they cannot actually have the real use case of it. And if you want to see ke bhai, what does this store, if you want to see ke bhai, what does this token has, so you can just copy it, and you want to dehashify it. So this is the hash that they have generated. Now if I want to decrypt it, you can go to this particular website called jwt.io. And what it has is, here you put the encoded message and it will decode for you. So if I do it here, here you can see the algorithm they're using, the KID they're using, the type of it, the payload actually has lot of things, including my email. So this gibberish is converted into this, specifically this blue purplish thing is converted into my email, and it checks whether this email is verified or not, right? So along with it, there basically a lot of things that you can get it converted for. So hopefully that is clear. Okay, bhai, it is the token that you actually store, not the actual username and password. Is it clear? Just
Yep.
say, yeah, somebody was saying something.
Yeah, it's clear.
Yep, sure. So once we are done with JWT, how to implement the JWT, we'll go with the database, right? And how do you actually write few operations in database using, most likely we'll be using two types of databases here. We'll use MongoDB, right? MongoDB, and along with it, if the time requires us, we'll also use Postgres, right? And how to use these databases are, for Mongo specifically, you can, for MongoDB specifically, you have this library called Mongoose library that allows you to do. For JWT, we have this library. What is it called? Forgot. It's not been using for a long period of time. JS. Yeah, JSON Webtoken is the library. So I'll be using this particular library to actually do the JWT thing. And once this is done, we'll use Prisma. Hopefully, this is also not required, but essential if you're not using MongoDB. Then to, you can just write raw SQL queries, but this Prisma is a wrapper, which hides all the complexity of interacting with any database. What did I say? Prisma is a wrapper. It's actually a wrapper. It's a wrapper around all the databases. Wrapper around databases that allows, that hides all the complexities of interacting with databases, right? So what it does is, you are using Prisma is one library. You are writing only same code. The only thing that you are going to change is the database type you're going to change, and the URL of the database where your database is actually located, right? So if any one of you might have seen, you have different type of databases. You have SQL database, you have NoSQL database, right? So the way to write queries in SQL and NoSQL are is very different, right? So Prisma says कि भाई, you don't even need to write the query, I'll just take care of it. There is a certain way of how I can be used. What all you need to do is just tell me what type of database you are going to use, and just give me the URL of the database. I'll cater all the things. In fact, if it is very easy to use Prisma, once you're done with it, I'll just show you the snippet of the code. uh, yep. So yeah, so if you see this particular piece of code, that is, they want to add a user inside the database. So all they did was prisma.users.create, and they have added the data. Okay, I want to add name and email. Obviously we are going to see that in detail. So hopefully once the Prisma is done, you know how to, this is the stage 2 of our bootcamp, right? Once this is done, you know how to create the front end, you know how to create a backend, right? You know how to create the front end, backend, you know how to create the users, how to interact with the database, right? All these things, but you will understand soon that by this thing that you have learned, document object manipulation, this is not very efficient, and I need to write a lot of code. And this is where this particular thing is introduced. React is a framework that was introduced by Meta in 2014, I guess. So they introduced this particular framework, and they have this monopoly. Although you have other frameworks for the front end, you have Svelte, Vue, all those things, but React has been exceptional since then, and it's an industry standard again. So React says कि भाई I'll again hide all the complexity of the way you're writing DOM. It's very difficult. So React just made it easier for you to write the web pages, the front end of the web pages. So React comes under the front end, and that's how you cover most of your MERN. So in MERN, if you see MongoDB refers to M, E for Express, R for React. One thing is missing, that is Node, which I'll just add it here. Node is nothing but a runtime environment for JavaScript. No need to know about it. We'll get there when we'll get there. But Node.js something similar to JavaScript only. It's JavaScript is a language. Node.js provides the environment for you to run JavaScript in the backend. So let's talk about this as well. JavaScript, as I said you earlier, any website you open, any website you want to make, you can make in HTML, CSS, and JS. And JavaScript was initially written for the web pages only. But later developers realized that bhai, it because JavaScript is very simple, right? It's easier to use. What if we have the same thing, the same language in the backend as well? So Node.js say, okay, but we will provide the environment, right? You want to write Express, you want to do the CRUD operations. You write in JavaScript only, and we will translate that into whatever that is required to be done. So that is how the Node.js came into the picture. So hopefully once this is done, React again, as I said you, it's very big thing. Requires a lot of time and effort to be spent to get mastery in, right? But we will just learn about the important things, as I said you earlier. It is components that we'll learn. We'll learn about hooks. We'll learn about life cycle events. All what you need to create a basic good web page, right? And hopefully this is the last thing that we'll do, that is the deployment. And if you have the questions about the deployment, hopefully we'll do this way. We'll deploy our apps either on AWS EC2 or Vercel. So these are the two most popular platforms, completely different from each other. You have other platforms as well, but we are not going to learn that. But as I said you earlier, I'll share you all the things and all the resources where you can learn the things, right? So that's all from the learning of what we are actually going to learn and spend our time with. Do you guys have any sort of a question for me? So do you guys have any sort of a question for me? You can just put in a text as well if you wish to, as a query. No question, no queries. Asad will elaborate on JWT when we'll get there. I just give you a gist of it. Basically, क्या होता मालूम? You have username and password. What JWT does is it takes your username and password and converts into some gibberish string, as you have seen in an example, right? तो उन्हें क्या करता बोलते हो? आपका username and password लेता. You have username, you have password, and what it does is basically converts into some random string which is unreadable. उसको देख के आपको पता नहीं चलता कि अरे ये क्या तो भी है बोलते आप. ठीक है? This is all what the JWT is. So this string is converted into this token, right? Again, if you and this is you can encrypt and decrypt it both ways, right? So you are giving username and password and converting into this thing, and you can take this thing and convert into back in username, not in password. Although you are using password to convert it, but the password won't be shown. So basically here something different things happens. I'll show you. right now it will be very confusing for you to know about it. Any other queries about it? What does Prisma gains from being used for free? Okay, yeah, good question. Really good question. So, what Muzakkir is asking, okay, well, you said okay, well, Prisma hides all the database functionalities, right? So instead of earlier, people would learn ke bhai, acha, I want to learn SQL queries, so I need to write. And SQL queries are very complex. It can get very complex, honestly. So how many of you are aware of SQL? Like um, you had SQL as your subject or DBMS in which you have learned SQL? Just say yes in the chat if you have already learned about SQL queries, right? A bunch of yes, right? Right. A lot of yeses, right? So I'm assuming most of you know what SQL queries are. So simple CRUD operations can be written. Okay, bhai, I want to do create user from, right, where all these clauses are there, these are there, right? But it can get very expensive and very complex really quickly, right? Let's say if I say you कि भाई fetch me the users whose name starts with A and ends with Z, and go to another table and check whether how many of they are above 70. So all these complexities can be added, right? Where 3 4 different tables are required to fetch the data from, and it gets very complex really quickly. So what Prisma does is Prisma says, "Ke bhai, you don't need to write all this thing. The same thing that you are doing here, writing this thing, create user from and all this thing. Here, all you do is Prisma dot user dot create. What is user here? User is a table. Here, where you put the user, the second thing you put in SQL query is a table, right? So here also you do the same thing, but Prisma dot user dot create and nothing else, sir. I just put the data what I want to add, right? So Prisma in turn converts these this thing into an SQL query. The question here that was asked was, "Ke bhai, if Prisma is allowing all these things, then how does Prisma earns the money on its own?" So Prisma has something known as Accelerate. Prisma Accelerate. If you might have heard of it, it's Accelerate is like a platform where Prisma says, "Ke bhai, if you want to deploy your database, just deploy with us. We'll take your database, and if you might let's go getting too confused. The thing is, if as I said you earlier, okay, but YouTube goes to backend server and backend server goes to the database and fetches the things, right? This is clear. But the amount of time that is required for backend to go to the database, let's say the user is sitting in India and the YouTube's backend server is in America, is in US, right? So the amount of time taken, the amount of hops, it is not the amount of hops will increase obviously. So the amount of time taken for the database to be fetched is really a lot, right? तो ठीक है भाई, यूएस के सिटीजन्स के वास्ते तो जो है ना, the query time will be very less, but for the Indian citizens the query time is very high, right? Similarly, the farther away the database is, the more time it is going to take. So Prisma has this one more thing that it offers out of the top, right? What it does is basically it takes the copies of your databases in a chunk, and you will deploy it one place, but Prisma actually copies into different regions. So in India they will have one, in US they will have one, in UK they will have one. So kabhi, it will check kabhi, user is closest to which particular region. So somebody is sitting in the UK or around the region. So Prisma says ke bhai, you just give us our data, will distribute your data. This way the amount of time that was taking for you to take the response from the database will be reduced by a large extent, right? And this is where they actually start taking the money. So this is how they spend time. In fact, they have also introduced their own database. So till now people would be going to different like usually if you want to learn, you can have your own local database. MongoDB you can set up locally. You can set up Postgres locally, right? But let's say if I want to deploy a website, so I have to buy a web database which is stored somewhere else. Obviously, I cannot say कि भाई I cannot first of all allow everyone to hit my laptop because my laptop is having the Postgres ka database. And second thing, my laptop has to be on 24/7, right? Because भाई मेरी वेबसाइट पे आके if anyone wants to hit my database and fetch something, right? So my laptop has to be powered on all 24/7. So it is the amount of compute it takes is very large. Second thing, I don't want to give access to my laptop. So what you do basically is you buy databases, right? AWS allows you to buy database on their website. Similarly, GCP, Azure, and you have bunch of database providers. You have Neon, you have Avin, if we might have heard of it. Neon is there. Neon is there, Avin is there. So Postgres also has recently started their own database. So that's where they get the money from, where they are making the money from. So you can see it has ORM, Postgres itself, Studio, Optimize, Accelerate, and the last thing you have is Pulse. Hopefully that answers your question. Any other query apart from this? Okay, we'll start. If guys don't have any queries regarding this, then we'll start our class by tomorrow, inshallah. But today we'll set up our ID. How many of you have VS Code already? Basically, IDE, as you might know, it is Integrated Development Environment. Integrated Development Environment. So hopefully most of you have the VS Code, right? So if anyone doesn't have the VS Code, then it should be there by tomorrow, right? How to install VS Code is very simple. Basically, you can write the code in your text pad as well, notepad as well, as most of you might be doing in your first year or second year, right? But it's better to introduce an IDE at this point, so your code is better managed. What IDE does is basically allows your code to be better structured. It has a lot of extensions which offers on the top of it, right? So based on whether you have Mac, Linux, or Windows, you can just download from here. And once you download it, you have something like this. I'm assuming most of you has VS Code. Even if you don't, just get it ready by tomorrow, and we'll start with HTML tomorrow, inshallah. What's the duration of the bootcamp? Most likely, we are keeping it for 5 weeks. Hopefully, the things that I've mentioned here should be covered in 5 weeks. Good enough. But later, if required, we can extend it. Right? We can have some in-person meetings where we actually solve a lot of doubts and resolve the things. But that's what we are keeping, aiming for 5 weeks. All right. Any other question? We'll be sharing a feedback form after this meet. If anyone wants to, hopefully, I'm actually willing to take all sort of feedback. So please do give your valuable feedback. And I'm sorry for the disturbances that was caused today, right? But I'll get it fixed by tomorrow, and we won't have any sort of network issues by tomorrow, inshallah. Any other question? So, all right, folks. If you don't have any other queries, then we'll end this meeting. I'll see you tomorrow. Signing
Sure,
off.
Nasi. That was a great session.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Thank you for the informative session.
Sure. I'm actually hurt by the network issues which were caused. Before I'll solve it tomorrow, inshallah.
I mean, yeah, that's totally not a problem. I mean,
Yeah,
network issues are always there, so
sure,
happens.
sure, man. All right,
Yeah.
folks. We'll end it now. We'll see you tomorrow at the same time, 7 o'clock. All right.
All right then.
All right. Bye bye.
Allah Hafiz.
Hafiz.